The good news of Jesus Christ according to the Gospel of St. John in the 8th chapter. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Truth. The truth will make you free, Jesus proclaims. Truth is a reoccurring theme in the Gospel of John, a theological issue at the heart of who Jesus is, what he is about. Upon proclaiming truth and making them free, these Jews who had believed in Jesus, they take issue with that. They are the sons and daughters of Abraham. They've always been free. Not true. They were enslaved in Egypt under Pharaoh. They were conquered and held captive by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. And in their current state, they are under the oppression of the Roman Empire. Not exactly free. But that isn't exactly what Jesus is talking about either. He goes on to talk about committing sin, being enslaved to sin. Whoever commits sin is enslaved to sin. So often in our beginning liturgies and worship, we come together first thing and confess our sin, and maybe you remember the language of the old LBW, page 56. We are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. It captivated my imagination even as a little one. Hard to understand what that might mean. But I think if we look around in the world, take a good honest look at our lives, maybe it's not so much being enslaved that we feel, but rather the brokenness of it all. Yesterday in Pittsburgh, there was a shooting leaving 11 dead. Shooting in a house of worship. Jewish brothers and sisters. There's brokenness. Even now today, while we are here in worship, there are people still picking up the pieces after Hurricanes Florence and Michael. There's brokenness. A couple of weeks ago, the UN released a statement about the global climate and the kind of timeline that we are on, something to be taken very, very seriously. The climate will bounce back, but maybe we won't. There's brokenness. There's need for healing on so many levels, from the very personal to the global. That brokenness is the kind of sin that we are enslaved to, something beyond us, beyond our control, where we are in need of being made free, where we are in need of that truth that will make us free. Later on in this Gospel of John, in Jesus' passion, there's a dialogue between Pilate, who is trying to actively release Jesus, and Jesus himself. And Jesus speaks of truth, and Pilate asks him, "What is truth?" I think he earnestly wants to know. I think these Jews who hear of statements earnestly want to know. I think we who are trying to work our ways through our struggles in this life earnestly want to know, what is that truth? What does it look like? It looks like Martin Luther, 501 years ago, standing up to the church that he was a part of as a priest and an academic, standing up to the church that he had been raised in, the church that he so loved so much that he wanted to see it change, wanted to see it reform. I have theses door up in all kinds of trouble that he did not foresee. But change came. Freedom came from a church that went from selling to a church that went to proclaim forgiveness. Forgiveness of God's grace. While the church was selling it, God was giving it away for free. That's truth. That's reformation. In my own life, I remember a schoolmate at Concordia College, older than me, but one day after an organic chemistry class, as we were kind of licking our wounds after a rough test, he and I chatted, and I got to know him a little better, and he unfolded his story. Tran was a refugee from Vietnam, fled his life, leaving his ancestors along with his two brothers, afraid for their lives. One night, they jumped into the sea and swam for their lives to a boat that would eventually take them to the United States. They risked their lives in those deep, dark, cold waters with sharks. Those three made it. And when they got to the States, they got to meet Lutherans. Lutheran social services took them in, connect them with a family and a congregation that helped raise them up and send them on to school at Concordia College. His story was one of brokenness, enslavement to the politics and wars of this world, to freedom, to peace. He got that chemistry degree, went on and got that MD. Now he's a healer among us. Free indeed, setting others free as well. That's what it looks like. Later on in life, in my senior year of seminary, we took a trip to Namibia, and wherever we went, we were hailed as heroes. It didn't really make sense to us so much until we learned what the story was, that coming from the seminary where we did, the people remembered Wartburg. They remembered the students there. They remembered the spouses of the students there, especially spouses who undertook the political cause to write letters and get other Lutherans to write letters from across this country to their legislators, to their Congress people, putting on such political pressure that sanctions happened. Sanctions against apartheid. Those sanctions were a part of what eventually set them free from systematic oppression, well before South Africa. They hailed us as heroes, not because we were a part of that, but just because we were connected to it. That is so very humbling. And it points out as well that the truth is not us. The truth is not Lutherans, but the truth can work through us. God can use us in our enslavement and in our brokenness. Use us to convey the truth that the Gospel of John is clear about. In chapter 1, John talks about the Word become flesh. A few verses down from that, we learn that the flesh is the Son who is full of grace and truth. And later still, in John 14, when Jesus is trying to prepare and console the disciples for what is going to happen the very next day, there at the Lord's Supper, Jesus tells them to not let their hearts be troubled, and he outlines for them this heavenly home, the Father's home, a mansion with many rooms for them all. Thomas doubts and wonders, well, we don't know the way to this. How can we find it? And Jesus then says, I am the way and the truth and the life. The truth that will make us free. The truth that shined through Martin Luther and the Reformation. The truth that shined through trans life, through the life of the Namibians, and stands to shine through our very own is not us, but it is the Son. The Son who has a permanent home under his auspices, those of grace and love. The Son brings us home. The Son makes us free. That is the truth. He is the truth, reshaping our lives from enslavement to freedom, from brokenness to wholeness, from illness to health. There is the truth. There is the Reformation. There is Jesus. Amen.